conference talk from Professor Russell Foster on sleep. And I'm really delighted that Professor Tim Spector has agreed to come and talk to us this afternoon on the new science of eating. Many of you will know Tim Spector's name and what he does, but I will give you a short bio. So he's a medically qualified professor of epidemiology and director of the TwinsUK Registry at King's College London. His current work focuses on the microbiome and nutrition, and he's co-founder of ZOE, a personalised nutrition company, which runs the world's largest nutrition study, ZOE Predict, and he has created a commercial at-home kit for personalised nutrition. He's also the lead researcher behind the world's biggest citizen science health project, the ZOE Health Study, which provided essential data in response to the pandemic. He was awarded an OBE for this work, and having published more than 900 research articles, he's ranked in the top 100 of the world's most cited scientists by Google. He's the author of 4 popular science books, most recently Food for Life, a Sunday bestseller. Tim, over to you with your session on the new science of eating, personalised nutrition and its impact on health.
Thanks very much, and thanks for inviting me. Hello, everybody. In a short time, I'm going to give a real snapshot of what I've been up to recently, and I think what the exciting things are in nutrition that certainly I wasn't taught as a doctor, and I don't think is I'm sure is not being taught today. But it's actually moved from perhaps most boring area of medicine to the most exciting. And I'll try and show you why I think that is. Now, I wasn't really interested in nutrition other than at an epidemiology level until 2011, when I was on a ski touring holiday and I reached the top of a peak at 3,000 meters, felt very unwell, and had realized at the bottom I had double vision, and realized I had something severe going on, which was either MS, a brain tumor, or a stroke. It turned out I had a very minor stroke, an occlusion in one of the blood vessels supplying nerves to the eye, and I got double vision, which lasted about 3 months. Also put my blood pressure up. So suddenly I was a patient, having thought I was invincible as a fit middle-aged guy, and looked to see what change to my lifestyle I could make to get myself back on track. And so suddenly I'd moved from population health, epidemiology, down to the personal level to say, well, okay, I can see a cardiologist who's going to put me on a blood pressure drug, but what else should I do? And my colleagues weren't very helpful on that. They were really good at drugs, but not much else. And that's when I started looking at the internet, and I came across these basic dogmas, which is pretty much there still today. Count your calories, remember all calories are equal, avoid high-fat foods, go for low-fat products, eat starchy foods, never skip meals, eat little and often, exercise is a great way to lose weight, and that generally one diet fits all, and the eat well plate is right up there with the basic guidelines. And it unfortunately, it turns out that all this was complete rubbish, and there was no science behind it. As I started to research this myself, realized that all that data was outdated, based on either flawed epidemiology or very small clinical trials done on a few students that didn't generalize to the rest of the population, certainly didn't generalize to anyone aged over 50, and really missing a lot of what was really going on. And it is sad to see that the NHS guidelines are still pretty similar today, with only really the fact that we should be eating more fruits and vegetables highlighted. So there was me. I'm aged, I'm in my early 50s. I thought I'd put on lots of muscle. It turned out I'd probably put on fat, and I'd gained about 10 kilos, about 84 kilos at that point. Not obese, but not the ideal weight. And I wonder if it was things I'd been eating that I'd been taught. Low-fat milks, having muesli in the morning, good quality one, cups of tea, the odd little croissant or bagel and orange juice. And at my hospital lunch would generally be a brown bread sandwich of tuna and sweet corn from the M&S, maybe with a bit of fruit like grapes, etc. And then in the evening, a rice or pasta dish with occasional bits of meat, trying to keep it low fat. And it turns out that for me, this was totally the wrong diet to have. And when I finally got hold of a continuous glucose monitor, I saw that these gave me terrible peaks. And this really could be explaining why I'd been slowly gaining weight over these years, despite exercising, cycling to work, etc., etc. And many people might find this familiar. Now, I think the reason we've all got it so wrong is that the whole world of nutrition didn't know about, and then more recently has perhaps ignored, the huge role of the complexity of nutrition and our bodies. So food is not just these macronutrients and calories, it's 30,000 different chemicals that are interacting with the metabolites in our blood, with tens of thousands of chemical reactions all the time. And this is being mediated by 100 trillion microbes in us that are also very part of this complexity, which we need to embrace if we're going to move forward. And the microbiome, for those of you who don't know it, is best considered like a living organ. It weighs about the same as the human brain if you put all the microbes together. And 100 trillion bacteria, there's probably 5 times as many phage viruses that eat those bacteria. You've got fungi, you've got protists, and they're like little mini pharmacies pumping out chemicals all the time. And it may not be so much what the microbe is or its type of species, but it's what it produces and what chemicals it lets out there that interacts with our immune system. That is key. Most of our immune cells are in our gut, just like most of our nerve endings outside the brain are in our gut, interacts with these and has many myriad effects on our body that we're only just beginning to understand. And unlike what I was taught at medical school, 99% of our microbes are beneficial. And in my discovery through my books, I did lots of self-experimentation. I just finished the French cheese diet, which absolutely advise for anyone who likes French cheese. You just have raw milk French cheese for 3 days, washed down with a glass of red wine, and 3 times a day. It's fantastic for 24 hours. You do get a bit sick of it after day 3. And the next test I was doing was the McDonald's diet for 10 days. And I was going to eat at McDonald's and see what effect it had on my gut microbes. But luckily, another volunteer came along who liked McDonald's, was hard up for cash, and he also happened to be my son. So he was a student at Aberystwyth at the time, and he undertook the challenge with great relish. Although after 4 days, he came back and said, novelty's wearing on off. I'm not feeling so great. Don't look forward to it anymore. Do you mind if we stop? And as a concerned parent and medical doctor, of course, I said, no way, you carry on. We're going to publish this in the Sunday Times. And that's what we did. And the important point here is that with a purely junk food diet, 0 fiber, he lost around 30% of his gut diversity in that short time. It's only an N of 1 study, but I think brings it home that even now he hasn't got back to high levels of gut microbes, despite my feeding him. Now, as I was learning more about the microbiome and was getting more and more interested in it, I was particularly, and I'd come into it from studying twins for 30 years. I was interested in why identical twins were different. And the one thing I could find about them was that their microbes were very different. There was virtually no genetic influence on gut microbes, even in identical twins. And it was giving a talk just like this in 2017 when two guys came up to me and said, we'd love to form a company around the gut microbiome and personalized nutrition and using CGMs. And they convinced me to work with them. And they were very good at raising money, convincing people. And my one stipulation was that we do this based on science rather than marketing, and that we do some real big scientific experiments first in order to train the algorithms and train the AI to do it. And I couldn't have done this a few years before because we didn't have the technology. We didn't have the big computing power easily that could do this relatively cheaply, personal predictions. Didn't really have AI in any usable form. We didn't have CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, which had, in 2017 was suddenly available and cheap, so they could be used in mass experiments. We weren't able to do dry blood spot testing of blood lipids, for example, or multiple metabolites, and that was now available. You had apps suddenly for the first time that you could use and record your dietary changes, scan foods, and also enter how you were feeling every day in terms of symptoms. And of course, we didn't have the sequencing capacity to look at all the microbes. And just 10 years ago, sequencing your gut microbiome would cost about £10,000. Now you can probably do it for close to £100 in high numbers. So all these things were the perfect timing to start a company in this field. And this was the first study we did, so it didn't really do anything for the first 2 years other than the science. It was setting up the biggest study done on personalized nutrition, which isn't hard in the nutrition space, but most studies are done on sort of 20 to 40 people. So we had 1,000 people given identical foods at the same time of day. And this is called the ZOE Predict study. Most of them were twins. And I won't go into the details because this was published in Nature Medicine a couple of years ago. But the important thing to notice is that for the individuals, there was a 10-fold difference in how people responded to this identical muffin, identical calories, identical time of day in terms of their blood fat levels, their triglycerides 6 hours after that meal, and their glucose levels within the 2 hours of that meal, and also their insulin. So huge variations. And that was really the basis of saying, well, we can go and predict how anyone will respond to other foods. Now we've done this test set. And if everyone did this experiment, we could use that to then write an algorithm to predict how they will respond to foods, because we don't want to have these big spikes in fat and in sugar. And I put twins in the study because I thought they would have a genetic component, that we'd actually be using genetics to help predict food responses. But it turns out that there was really hardly any difference between twins and non-twins for these food responses. And even identical twins had different response to food. Other things we found, some of them by chance, actually, just by having this big data set of all these people followed up who had done this identical testing and multiple bloods, etc., was that we found out that 1 in 4 people have these sugar dips after eating sugary foods. 2 to 3 hours after a meal, they will get a dip. And these 1 in 4 people actually get hungrier, more tired, and will overeat by about 300 calories in that day. And this is a marvelous example of not only this individuality between people, but also why some people get that mid-morning or post-lunch dips and others don't. But also it's a great advert for getting rid of a calorie, because the same calories can give a completely different response to different people. Now, as part of that initial Predict study, we also looked at the gut microbes and the effects they were having. And we're really trying to work out the links between gut microbes and food. And again, most of the studies on gut microbes and food have been very small ones. And so not really any strong correlation. So ours was the first one to see whether the gut microbes are linked to good and bad foods, but also good and bad food health outcomes, to see if there were certain key elements that we could link up. And we found in this initial one 15 good microbes and 15 bad microbes that were associated consistently in our group. And this allowed us to come up with a new scoring system, and also potentially a way of trying to promote the good ones and reduce the foods that were feeding the bad ones. And this is sort of more where we are now, where we did Predict 1, which was on 1,100 people. There were 100 in Mass General Hospital. We've done a number of other small little studies based on that. We checked the results from the UK predominant group with the US group and found pretty much identical results, although clearly the diets and gene pool are different. And now what we call Predict 3 is the customer base. These are our customers that have bought the commercial product, because the kit is now in commercial form, but they're still contributing to the science. So they've all signed consent forms to say that we can use their data for scientific purposes. And we're basically we've got about 100,000 we've sold. I think about 50,000 have completed the tests so far. So we've increased by 50-fold our data set now. And we've also done longitudinal studies, and we've done an RCT, which hopefully I'll get a chance to discuss. And of course, we have a free arm, which I think is important, which we have the ZOE Health study, which was the COVID study initially, and we've transformed this into a citizen science free app that allows people to study lifestyle. And we've done things like look at effects of intermittent fasting in a pragmatic study in the population, and January habits about giving up things and whether people sustain them or not. And we think this is a great vehicle for doing all kinds of big mass community studies. And we also launched about a year ago, the ZOE Science and Nutrition podcast, which if I haven't heard about it, in the last few weeks, it's been ranked the number 3 most listened to downloaded podcast in the UK across all categories. So that's really, I'm very proud of that free educational side of things we're doing, as well as the commercial side. And just to remind you, those who might have probably heard about the COVID app that we had about 4.5 million people on that, but we've now transformed this to the ZOE Health Study app. And we are getting people to record how they're feeling, their mood, their energy, things that doctors don't normally ask, and giving people feedback on how that's gone for them, whether it's intermittent fasting, cold showers, standing on one leg, whatever it is, to try and say, well, did it work for them? Did it not? And feeding this back. So things that you can't do in normal medical practice. And just a reminder, many people are still interested in the COVID app. I think what was important is in 5 days, the ZOE team built this app that managed to track symptoms, and we got nearly 5 million users in total, huge audiences we didn't expect at all. And we did many, many good things on this. It was initially funded by ZOE, then briefly the government for 18 months, then they dropped it and ZOE are funding it again. But I think this has changed forever epidemiology, and I don't think we're ever going to go back to pencil and paper or web surveys. Apps are so much better, and we got so much fantastic interaction. And an example of this is how we studied 1 million people through the COVID study app. We gave them a free food frequency questionnaire, asked them about whether a year later how much COVID they'd had, how severe it was. Turned out that poor diets were associated with an increased risk of severe COVID, even when you adjusted for education, deprivation, geography, weight, and other existing complaints. And we did this literally in a few weeks, and it would have taken us 5 years and £5 million to do it any normal way. And again, emphasized diet quality and its, in this case, effect on the immune system, which I think links it to the gut microbiome. Very briefly, the ZOE program, I think we took essentially what we tested at St Thomas's Hospital in our clinic there and put a home version out there. So everything you do is at home. If you sign up for it, you get a glucose monitor, which you put on yourself. You get a pinprick, so you can do your lipid testing onto a bit of dried paper, and you have a stool sample, all of which you send and return. And everyone gets standard muffins or special bars to eat, which are told to do every at identical times of day for everybody. So those results are showing promise, and we've got an RCT now showing that it really does reduce mood, improve mood, improves energy, and improves weight. These are my results. This is similar to what you get. My blood sugar wasn't great. My blood fat around the same. Things saving me were I had really good microbiome score. So my ratio of good to bad bugs is good, hopefully, because I'm talking about it. It's not dreadful, but it goes down with age. So it does get slightly harder with age to maintain all these things. And the other thing we measured is my blastocystis result. So I have a parasite in me called blastocystis, which 5 years ago, if I'd seen my GP, he'd have been looking up different anti-parasitic drugs to try and remove, because in the literature it's associated with bloody traveler's diarrhea and a few other problems. But turns out that this is a sign of a very healthy gut, and this is effectively a predator parasite that lives in healthy people and eats microbes that are bad for our fat metabolism. So people who have it have better fat profiles, but less internal visceral fat, lower blood pressure, etc. So all our ancestors had it. We're now down to about 25% in the UK, 5% in the US, and we've been eradicating it. And I think I put the wolf in here as the analogy with the Yellowstone Park, is how important it is to have a few predators in there to keep your gut community healthy. And once you get rid of it, the whole thing falls over. So we need to try and get our gut communities back to good health. With my results, you get a list of every food you look up. We have about 30,000 foods on the database, and it gives you your personal score from 0 to 100, advising you whether you should be having it rarely, frequently, or occasionally. We never say there's any food you should never have or avoid. The idea is to increase diversity of choice and food and just shift people away from some of their poor choices. For example, I used to eat bananas every day, take a banana to work. Turns out my score for bananas is quite poor, and I can double that score if I just change to an apple or a pear. So it's simple choices like this that the plan is designed for. And this just reminds me that the studies have shown really big effects on energy and hunger, which I think we weren't expecting. And it could be these removing the sugar spikes really improves energy levels and reduces hunger. And we have this RCT, which we haven't published yet, but I can say is definitely not negative. So in conclusion, calorie counting and exercise alone doesn't work for weight loss. And food really is medicine. And the future of food, I think, is this technology, it's apps, it's putting proper labels on food, giving people real advice, it's gut scores, personalization. And as a little personal tip, if you want to improve your microbes, these are my 5 guidelines. Eat 30 plants a week, have regular fermented foods, eat the rainbow because they're full of polyphenols, rest your gut with trying to fast for 12 to 14 hours overnight, and probably most important, reduce your reliance on ultra-processed foods, which are really harmful, both for your gut microbes and your hunger levels. And I'm going to finish. Oh, I didn't have it in there. Oops. There was another slide. Just to say that if anyone wants to get their discount on the ZOE kit, if they're a medical professional, they just put in the code ZOEMed50 and they'll get 50% off for a limited time. And with that, I'll stop and ask questions and get some questions. I'm sure there'll be some. Thank you.
Tim, thank you very much indeed. You're doing fantastic work, and it's incredible what you can do with apps, isn't it? Now, you talk about food being really medicine. Well, you have an audience packed full of healthcare professionals. How can they take your messages forward in terms of the public, never mind themselves?
Well, I think changing the adage, that most of us are still taught in medical school that, diet is all about eating less and moving more, realizing that's rubbish. And it's very much about exercise is not a good weight loss tool, and that training people to eat quality food less often is really important. And I found through my books that trying to give some simple messages saying, well, eat for your gut, and you can't go far wrong. What do your microbes want to eat? Then that's a pretty good guideline that a lot of people can start to conceptually understand. And that moves them away from this cycle of junk food, low-fat foods, low-calorie foods that are ultra-processed onto whole foods, high in fiber, high in real nutrients and chemicals, and introducing things like fermented foods into people's diets. I still hear of many doctors warning people off their patients going on fermented foods because they're worried about it being live, it's got microbes, it might give you infections. This is all complete nonsense, but it's just generally out of ignorance that we're doing these things. And there are now big studies showing regular fermented foods can significantly reduce inflammation levels, change your immune system. And we just need to change mindsets here, that there are many trials now that a change in diet, like in depression, can be more effective than an antidepressant. And I think we've just got to start realizing that diet is a really big part of a doctor's armory that we're not at all using at the moment.
I'll ask you one more question. There's some questions coming in on the comments, and you could perhaps have a look at them because one or two of them are quite long. I've noticed, I think last week in the media, that we're being told that the record numbers of people not working because of ill health and mental health and back and neck pain have been referred to. Do you expect lack of nutrition being a contributing factor to the amount of ill health? Perhaps post-COVID as well.
Yeah, well, they're all related because, we have a huge amounts of ill health in this country. It's not a surprise that we have record levels of obesity and type 2 diabetes. And we have the most percentage of ultra-processed food in our diet of any country in Europe. So 57% of adult calories come from ultra-processed food. That's 70% in our children. So this is fueling overeating. We know that ultra-processed food itself increases appetite, makes you overeat, and the chemicals upset your gut microbes, which upset your immune system. So I think our poor diets are a major contributor to this. And there's a lot of evidence now that in depression, RCTs have shown that shifting your diet can actually, as I said, work better than most antidepressants, which have a high failure rate. So I think, yes, in terms of pain, muscular pain, I mean, a lot of osteoarthritis is related to obesity and lack of general fitness. The evidence for pure, autoimmune disease, again, relates to the gut microbiome and diet to some extent. And so, I think we could dramatically improve our health if we improved our population's diet and, gave the poor who suffer most from this the resources to do that, either by subsidizing it or, making this a more important objective than, giving them extra tablets.
There's a very important short question here in the comments. Can food be a tool to manage the stress at work? Well, for healthcare professionals,
I think it can. Yes, there are studies of both probiotics, either as capsules and probiotics as food, in anxiety and stress, showing that they do have some potential benefits. We need bigger studies to do this properly, and this might well be one of our citizen science projects. But I think reducing those sugar spikes, just grabbing a croissant or a bagel or your hospital sandwich on the go and giving a sugar spike, it is contributing to these stresses. One day I only ate these ZOE muffins for 24 hours. Every 4 hours I had another 2 muffins, and my blood sugar spikes were going like this. And my brain, I just had brain fog, and I was anxious. I couldn't do any work at all. And it struck home what happens when you do these things. And if you can just flatten that out. So do try it. I think it's really important. Just try and really improve your diet for a couple of weeks, just see what effect it has on your mood. Because the testimony of many of the people doing the ZOE program, again, unexpectedly seems to be on mood and energy levels.
So Stephanie's written a very positive message, and the question she asked is, do you have any thoughts around the successful dieting to very low body fat that this group see often with a fixed meal plan and without the variation required for the gut microbiome? It's the bodybuilding world. Yeah, Stephen Bartlett, who provokes a lot of discussion in the bodybuilding world. Does that ring a bell?
Bodybuilders, yeah. They're going for short-term gain. They're having these masses of protein, most of which they just pee out into the toilet or gets converted to carbs because the body can't store protein if you can't get it into muscle. And you're right, it's similar to these keto diets that you can often get short-term weight loss, but long-term you're building up problems for yourself because you're not getting that plant diversity, you're not getting your microbial diversity, and you're not really helping your immune system and everything else. So anything that is restrictive, reductionist type diets, I think it is a long-term disaster, although some of them work quite well short-term. And I think this current trend of obsession with protein is totally marketing-led, and we shouldn't be distracted by it. We get enough protein even without trying to get it because we have sort of overnutrition.
We're getting a lot of questions coming in the comments. I will, if I can pick up 2 more, would you have a chance after you finished your session just to go in the comments and perhaps answer a couple that you haven't been able to live?
I'll do a couple, though. I've got to do another talk afterwards, so I'll see how quick I can get.
Okay, see how you get on. Just one question: what is the gut microbiome like in children? They have more mood swings, but do they have more mood? Oh, they have more mood swings, but remain healthy.
The first 4 years, children have very variable gut microbiome. It doesn't settle down into the adult form for those years. Remember that children are born sterile, so they get their microbes from the mother in the birth process. And so every little infection, every treatment with antibiotics has a huge knock-on effect on the child microbiome. We don't really know enough about it. Very few studies, often ethically difficult to collect it from children. And so we're a bit ignorant about what a good and bad gut microbiome is. But we certainly see differences between obese children, allergic children, non-allergic children. We can clearly see those differences. We don't really know what a normal one looks like.
And the last one that comes back to healthcare professionals: what are the effects of night shifts on the gut microbiome?
They've done studies of this, and they are disruptive. And we do know that poor sleep or these differences in your time zones have effects not only on your glucose levels, so you get glucose spikes coming much more readily after a poor night's sleep and desire for carbohydrates, but your microbes are all affected, and they have their own circadian rhythm as well. So they like to rest, and this is why intermittent fasting probably works, is it gets your gut microbes into a very nice rhythm that they can rest and work, and they know exactly when they've got to do their job. So night shift workers, which is about a fifth of the population, are at much greater risk of poor gut health as a consequence. So need to take extra care, and they get the worst of both worlds. So we really need to do much more for shift workers, and a lot of them are still working in the health service as well.
Indeed. Tim, that's a fantastic talk, and thank you very much, not only for the talk, but answering the questions so fully. Really, really helpful indeed. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll let you go off and do your next talk.
Okay, my pleasure. Goodbye,
Thank
everybody.
You very much indeed.
And look at the ZOE podcasts, my book, and
Absolutely.
all things. You can get all the information, a lot of the information there. Bye, everybody.
Okay, superb. Thank you very much indeed. Right, we've just got a screen break of 5 minutes before we have our last plenary speakers. So we'll see you in 5 minutes.